Hi, this is Nick, and I'm with Michael Ross all the way from Nashville. Welcome to Yorkshire.
It's great to be here.
And welcome to Music for the Head and Heart. I wanted to start off by asking about Guitar Moderne, which I know is a site that you've been promoting. And how long has that been going, and what's the thinking behind it?
Well, it's been going, I think, almost 7 years now, something like that. I started maybe a year before I moved to Nashville, and I had been spending a lot of time on YouTube looking for avant-garde guitar players, people who are doing something different with the instrument other than the normal shredding, riffing, things like that, getting new sounds, doing new approaches. It's something I've always been interested in addition to being interested in roots music and blues and things like that. So I was finding all these great players and all these great videos, and I was loving them, and I'm thinking, who can I share this with? I'm spending all this time. And I thought about putting it on Facebook, but I have a lot of guitar player friends, but only a fraction of those would be interested in this particular kind of guitar playing. We're talking about people who are playing it flat on their laps, putting alligator clips on it, or basically making noise with it rather than notes. So I thought about putting up a website, and I thought I can aggregate the videos there, and if people come, if you build it, they will come or not. And I taught myself enough WordPress to put the site together, and I started putting the videos up, and lo and behold, people started coming. There seems to be an interest in this worldwide, and it seems to be growing. And eventually I got advertisers, and now it's been going for 7 years, and I do it whenever I can because I still write for Guitar Player and Premier Guitar, and I have a column in Electronic Musician. So when I can spare time from all that, I try and post stuff, and I do interviews and gear reviews and things like that. Started getting into this through Norwegian guitar players. I discovered Ivan Arset, who was playing with Nils Petter Molvar. I was actually doing a session in San Francisco with a woman named Ina Kumanis, who's a great singer, and she's been on ECM with Bar Phillips. Heard the way I played, and she said, there's this guitar player you would really like, Ivan Arset, and I discovered him on the Nils Petter Molvar Khmer album, which is an amazing record on ECM, and which actually featured an entire separate album of remixes. And Ivan was a guy who was playing through a laptop in addition to playing through pedals. He was a brilliant guitar player. I mean, he could shred with the best of them, but he was making as many sounds as he was notes. And then from there, I discovered, well, actually, maybe even before that, I had discovered Raoul Bjorkenheim and from Finland, who's a great, it's like if Hendrix met Ornette Coleman. And then I discovered Stian Visterhus from Norway, who basically really does largely play sounds more than, he'll bow the guitar, but he's a master of pedals and does glitchy stuff. And then from there it branched out, and there's just all these European guitar players. British guitar player I'm going to meet with on Saturday that I've met, Leo Abrahams, does stuff like that in addition to playing with Brian Eno and Brian Ferry. People from, Eastern Europe. There's a guy, David Collar, who sounds a lot like Ivan Arset, who's, I believe, I'm trying to remember where he's from, but it was an Eastern European country, Czechoslovakia or somewhere like that. Italian guitar players. They're all over. I mean, they really are all over the world. And a lot of them moved to New York, and so there's a lot of them in New York. And this guy, Don Mount, M-O-U-N-T, he goes around to all the New York clubs and does a lot of videotaping. I'm showing my age. He does a lot of recording of these avant-garde artists of all kinds playing the clubs in New York, and he posts that, and I repost it. It's Guitar Moderne is, I think of it more as an aggregation site than an actual magazine. I mean, I do write for it. I do write, I'll write intros to the interviews, but at the beginning I was just doing email interviews.
So how's technology changed music, and particularly avant-garde music, sort of since you've been playing? Because you've been playing for a while.
Yeah, well, technology has always changed music. I mean, there's the long story of it that it's changed with as soon as we started recording music. It's changed through digital recording of music. But in terms of performance, um, things are getting smaller and lighter, which is of course lovely as you get older. But as much as I love vintage gear and the sound of a great guitar into a great tube amp, there's nothing like it, and never will be. There's such a world of sound out there for people who want to explore other sounds. And I started using a laptop, and I discovered Ableton Live, which allows you to trigger clips and record and loop and do all sorts of things and use computer plug-in processing, a lot of which when I started doing it was not available in the form of pedals. It's amazing how that's something else that's changed. More and more pedals are emulating the kind of processing you could previously only get in computer DAWs. And just to put it plug in for one of my Guitar Moderne advertisers, Red Panda pedals, that is kind of his whole thing, is the particle and the new tensor and the stuff. They're doing glitchy things and granular things that before him you could only get through using plugins. So I was using that in Ableton Live. And then more recently, apps have become, iOS apps have become incredibly powerful and do things because of the touchscreen that you can't even do with Ableton or any kind of laptop processing. And I could demonstrate some of it. There's a thing called Ohm to mix various apps so that I can bring them in and out if I want. I mean, one of the most exciting ones is Borderlands. And in the interest of time, I've already recorded some, I guess you call loops, you can do any number of loops and record them and have them separate. But as you'll hear, there's no sound coming out. And the sound doesn't come out until you put one of these circles over the recorded music. And then that begins granularly processing it. And you can, if you do different sounds, you get different chords or notes coming out. And I can make this, and then you open it up and you can modify. You can make it louder. You can do crazy stuff, and the number of processing voices. If you wanted to sound more like it actually sounds, you would use less voices. Maybe use more voices. How it overlaps. How fast it does it. There's all sorts of stuff you can do, but that's just the beginning. What you can do is record movements of this. So I can record this and go. And then I hit play, and it will play those chords separately. So I can have it do that in any order I want, any way I want to do it. I can also record movements within the parameters, so I could have it get louder or softer. I could change the width. I could change the voices. I mean, there's just a million things you can do with it. And then this is all relatable to a key. I have it set for a kind of a Lydian, so I can then play along with it if I want. And so on and so forth. I can get rid of that if I want, and then go back and just quickly show another one. This is called iDensity. Here I can record 6 separate tracks and have them all processed granularly separately. There's one. And the touchscreen aspect lets me actually play it. And it goes on forever. I mean, it's a lot. There's a lot, but yeah, I think you can get the idea of what you can do. And then with the mixer, I can take it, bring these in and out, and mix and match them, and do all sorts of stuff. And it goes on from there. And I mean, I'm currently debating whether I just want to perform with this, or I have it also set up where with an interface called iConnect, I can have this working with my laptop and use Ableton Live and use this just as an effects send. So I can record into Ableton and send anything I record into Ableton to this to be processed by everything in this and sent back and returned. And the possibilities are endless. And it's just a tool that you can use to expand the sonic palette that you have. I've experimented with using it in conjunction with an amp and regular pedals and with a singer-songwriter, and I would love to see more people doing that. And there aren't many at present, but I think in the future you will see more.
Well, it's mindless, like Star Trek. If you went back to some 1950s studio and you go, this is what the future is going to be like.
It's true. Well, I mean, now, just a studio. You can have a recording studio that you can make a full professional record on for the cost of what one reverb would have cost you back in the day. I mean, I recorded in studios back in the day with the Lexicon digital reverb that looked like something from the deck of Star Wars, and with a handle on it, and you thought you'd push the handle and we're going to take off for somewhere, and they were, I don't know, $1,000, and now you can have that same digital reverb in a pedal this big for $175 or $200 or something.
So one of the things I wanted to talk about is, there's a lot of myths where people go, there's no money in music anymore,
Yeah.
which I'm not sure if this was, well, people were proclaiming this back in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, etc., etc., etc. But we had an interesting conversation on that, so I'd just like you to share your thoughts on that.
Well, there is no money in music anymore, I mean, frankly. But there never was any money in music for the vast majority of people making music. I mean, I made music for 30 years, and the only time I ever made a living at it was when it was actually cheap to live in New York City, and I was playing country and western in the 70s. I was in a bunch of, in all modesty, really good original bands, but we just never got signed. And if you didn't get signed, you didn't even get to make a record, let alone make money on a record. There's umpteen stories of people who have been signed to record labels and never made a dime on records. So the good old days were not all that good to begin with. These days, as we were discussing, I feel like maybe not as many people can get rich doing it, but more people can actually make money doing it. Whether you can make a living. There are people making livings playing music. It's not easy. It never was easy. But the outlets are there. I mean, but as we discussed, part of it's going back to the early days of recording when nobody made money from records, but they were an advertisement for your live shows. So if you can do a great live show and you can bring people into that live show, and you're willing to tour around, and you're young enough or old enough but have the constitution to keep doing it and love to do it, you do it and you make money. And there were people back in the day who weren't that famous, like the Meat Puppets, one of my all-time favorite band names, if not all-time favorite bands. They were all buying houses in Texas when they were playing around, because they were living, first of all, in Texas where it wasn't expensive. And they were making money and, you know, traveling in a van and, you know, not apparently putting all the money up their noses or doing many of the other things musicians do. And they did fine. There are plenty of regional musicians like that who, you know, have regional gigs. Maybe that's not so much anymore. Maybe there aren't so many clubs where great regional musicians can have a residency and make a living. But so they may have to go on the road or be good enough to make it outside their region. Things are going to change. It's changing. It's not going back. And when things do this kind of transition, it gets rough for some people. I know really successful songwriters in Nashville that are now lamenting. I mean, a guy who wrote for stuff for Rod Stewart and Diana Ross. You know, these people are lamenting that their checks have gotten smaller. You know, well, for a long time their checks were really big, so I hope they put their money away. But it's a different world. It's just not going to happen like that anymore. But there are income streams. I mean, YouTube is a valid income stream. I just interviewed a Nashville guitar player who lives in Nashville now, great guitar player, R.J. Ronquillo. And he has a YouTube channel, and he was touring, excuse me, and making money touring, but he wants to get off the road, so he's going, you know, all in on the YouTube channel. And to do that, you have to do content, you know, at least 1 or 2 a week, and you have to get it out there and sell merch, and he's doing all that kind of stuff, and he's got advertising on his YouTube site, and you can make money like that. There's people making money like that. It's just a different world, and you have to face that to figure out where you're going to fit in it. I don't know what else to say.
Question. In all the time you've sort of like seen shows and listened to albums, if you were to pick out 3 shows or 3 albums that come to mind today, because I know tomorrow you may have different preference, what pops in your head where you think actually that was quite something?
Well, because I'm 3 years older than Water, you know, there have been times in my life when I've been privy to see revolutions in music or in guitar, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, I did get to see Jimi Hendrix, and that was pretty impressive, and it was revolutionary. And that whole time can be overrated, but there were things, certainly in terms of guitar and culturally, that no one had ever seen before, and he was one of them. I would say the guitarist after that turned my head around, I went to see Percy Jones play, because I knew his work from Brand X, the bass player, play. He had a band called Stone Tiger in New York at one point, and I had no idea who the other musicians were. If I did, I'd never heard of them. And I went down, and Dougie Bone was playing drums, great drummer. And there was this guy, Bill Frisell, playing guitar, who I'd never heard of. And by the end of the show, I'm thinking, this guy is from Mars. I mean, I've never heard anybody play a guitar like this. I've never heard... So he was using a guitar synth at the time, but that was the least of it. It was just the way he played. And for years, that was pretty much it, you know, in terms of people turning my head around. And then I heard Ivan Arset, and I thought, oh, this is a new way to approach it. And they've been coming pretty thick and fast since then. I mean, I guess Ivan was before. Then when I moved back to New York, I heard Oz Noy, who I was deeply impressed with, someone who just, where technique is no longer an issue, and they can do anything they want to do and do really interesting things, from the way he used effects to combining blues and jazz and Hendrix and bebop and things like that, and funk in ways that I'd never heard anybody do. And I was telling you, there's this new guy, Rafik Bhatia, who I just discovered and just recently saw, who is combining hip hop and electronica and things like that. So in terms of that kind of, you know, those are the things that have turned my head around in terms of the possibilities of the instrument. That's the main thing. And
3 albums, whether it's guitar based or not. 3 albums. We'll say 3 albums for today, because people always say,
oh, yeah,
your favorite or anything. Oh, well.
Oh no, that's just so hard. I mean, one that comes to mind, Coltrane's ballads. I mean, I've never been a fan of heavy bebop and Coltrane's later stuff. I mean, it's just it's not that I'm not a fan. I think it's amazing music and it's great. It's even great to learn as much as you can from it because it teaches you so much about playing and music. But that record just has, and it's funny, years later after I got into that record, I read an interview with Larry Carlton where he said that was one of his favorite records too. Because it just teaches you how to play a melody and it teaches you just how to be lyrical and have a great tone. Other albums though. It just, that Keimer album from Niels Peter Molvár, that turned me around. And living in Nashville now, I'm getting into, as I said, I am totally into roots music, great blues and great country music. And believe it or not, there is still great country music being made in Nashville. And, Leanne Womack's last record, I recommend to everybody who loves great country music. And the guitar player on that record, Ethan Ballinger, is this young guy from Nashville that is very low profile, but he's been playing, and he combines the two things that I love because he's been playing on these roots records like hers and this guy Andrew Combs' record, which is a great record. But he plays solos that are completely demented and weird on those records, and apparently they encourage him to do it. Because I asked him, how do you get away with it? And he said, I don't get away with it. They like it. And he plays, he discovered that it actually sounds great to put your delay before the overdrive. That can be a really great sound. I mean, if you think about it, that's Daniel Lanois' sound. He's running the Korg delay into an overdriven amp. And it was the sound in the old days all the time because nobody had overdrive pedals. If you were using a tape delay or anything like that and running into an amp, it was going into the amp. So it has a very distinctive sound, and I have my pedal board set up so I can do either. So there's that kind of stuff. There's a guy who wrote songs for that Leanne Womack record, Andrew Wright. Andrew Wright? I want to say it's Andrew Wright. I could be getting that wrong, but he's a great songwriter. I mean, he wrote a song from the perspective of a tree on which lynchings were taking place. And he does it in a way that is totally, it's not like polemic or didactic. It sounds like an old murder ballad, which is deeply rooted in country music. And his records have just filled with songs like that, just amazing stories, told very simply, produced very simply. He's got a great voice. Some of it sounds like Paul Simon. He sounds like Paul Simon on occasion, but it's terrific stuff. I mean, that's just the stuff that comes to mind. Pat McLaughlin, who is an relatively unknown guy outside of Nashville, but makes the greatest kind of roadhouse roots, pop, soul, country records in the world. I mean, he's one of the great white soul singers in a totally non-imitating black way, but he's totally soulful. And the band he's been playing with 20 years, Michael Rhodes, Kenny Greenberg, and on the records, some of the records, Greg Morrow on drums. They're just amazing. I mean, his songs are sometimes almost abstract. It's like he'll just throw in a line that's a great line that doesn't seem to have anything to do with the rest of the song, or even almost makes sense in English, but it sounds great, and it sounds great when he sings it, and it sounds great when the band plays it. So that's just what comes off the top of my head today.
Well, thanks so much. I mean, this platform is called Music for the Head and Heart, and I think we've covered a lot of stuff for both the head and heart here. And we really thank you for dropping by.
Well, thank you.